Hi everybody, welcome to my channel. In this video, we're going to take a look into the case of Drew Peterson. He made headlines a few years ago when his fourth wife disappeared and he was convicted of murdering his third wife. Maybe there is some confusion with Scott Peterson, who was also convicted for killing his wife, but it's just the same last name. It's not the same person. Well, the main goal of this video, though, is to bring Stacy's name forward and remind people she hasn't been found yet. Her family deserves to have some sort of closure, and in the hopes of someone coming forward and help find Stacy, let's see how things unfolded. But first, let's start from the beginning. Drew Peterson was born on January 5th, 1954 in Bolingbrook, Illinois. Drew joined the U.S. Army after he graduated from high school. In 1977, Drew joined the police department and then he joined the drug unit where he worked undercover. When he retired, he was a sergeant. So let's be honest, he was a cop, he had connections, and he knew what he was doing when he committed the crimes later on. I say crimes because even though Stacy hasn't been found yet, it is believed he killed her too. And I truly believe in this too. Drew Peterson married 4 times, and the common ground in all of his relationships is his need to control the women he was with, his infidelities, he was possessive, and he was abusive. 2 of those women wouldn't make it alive. One of them, as you know, is still missing, but it is believed to be dead. The first wife was Carol Brown, who he married in 1974. But she found out Drew was having an affair while he was working undercover. They divorced in 1980. They had 2 children together. In 1982, he married for the second time with Victoria Connolly, who had a daughter already. They were married for 10 years, and according to Victoria, she and her daughter were victims of domestic violence, and she also told the police later on Drew threatened her to kill her and make it look like an accident. Drew cheated on Victoria with Kathleen Savio, and then Victoria divorced him. In 1992, Drew married Kathleen Savio. They were married for 11 years. They had 2 children together, and like in all of his previous marriage, Drew started to having an affair with a teenager, Stacy Cales, while he was still married with Kathleen. Between 2002 and 2004, there were many reports of the police being called to the house on domestic disturbance, abuse, breaking and entering, and also because Drew would return the children late after visitation. He was a cop who did what he wanted because he knew he could get away with it. Kathleen was found dead in a bathtub. Her death was ruled an accidental drowning, but we will talk about that later on. Drew married his 4th wife, Stacy Cales, in 2003. Drew was 49 and Stacy was 19. They had 2 children together, then Stacy adopted Kathleen's children legally. She was studying to get her nursing degree, but in October 2007, she went missing, and till this day nobody knows where she is. But the common opinion is Stacy is dead, allegedly, and it is believed Drew murdered her. While working as a police officer, he was under investigation for failing to report bribes and misconduct while Drew was undercover. He was suspended and demoted. Drew's actions up until he was finally arrested were of deception and abuse. This isn't a case of someone who snapped, and his behavior kept escalating through the years. But let's talk about the death of Kathleen Savio. Kathleen was Drew's 3rd wife. He had 2 kids from the first marriage, and he also had 2 kids with Kathleen. Both marriages ended in divorce, so guess what it means? money, child support, assets. Kathleen and Drew, apart from their house, they had several businesses. They had a bar, a printing company, commercial property. They also had proceeds from several life insurance policies, and they also had personal property. So the divorce of Kathleen and Drew would have been very expensive to Drew. So if I had to speculate, the motive for the murder might have been financial reasons, allegedly. But let's look at what happened to Kathleen. On March 1st, 2004, Kathleen was found dead at home in an empty bathtub. She had her face down. She had fresh bruises. She had scrapes and contusions on her body. She had also a head injury consisted with a blunt force trauma. The doors of the house were locked. There were no signs of forced entry, and there were no signs of anything being taken. But here's how she was found. On the last weekend of February, Drew went to Kathleen's house to return the children, but nobody answered. On the next day, Drew asked some neighbors to go with him into the house, and that's how Kathleen was found. Given the history between Kathleen and Drew, it's not surprising Kathleen's family had some suspicions on Drew. An autopsy was performed. There was also a coroner's jury inquest. Coroner's jury heard the testimony of a state trooper who had never seen Kathleen's body, didn't attend the autopsy, and never interviewed Drew Peterson. So the question is, why was this person involved? The individual had no knowledge about the events. There was also a juror who was a police officer. The person knew Drew, and before their decision, he told the rest of the jury that he knew Drew Peterson in person and that he would never harm Kathleen. After an hour of testimony and deliberations, they ruled Kathleen's death an accidental drowning, and Drew Peterson had also an alibi for that day, his fourth wife, Stacy. But as the years went by, on August 31st, 2007, Stacy met with the pastor and she told him she had personal knowledge that Drew had killed Kathleen Savio and that Stacy knew since the night she died. According to Stacy, on the night Kathleen was killed, Stacy woke up and noticed Drew was gone. She looked for him at the house, but he was nowhere to be found. In the early morning, she found Drew Peterson standing in front of the washing machine. He was dressed in black and he was holding a bag. Then Drew took his clothes off and put them in the washer. Then he put the content of the bag into the washer too. And Stacy noticed it looked like women's clothing. Then Drew told Stacy he had hit Kathleen on the back of the head to make it look like her death was an accident. This information was made public by the pastor after Stacy disappeared. Not long after Stacy told the pastor about Drew's involvement in Kathleen's death, Stacy was contemplating going to the police to give this information, and she had also thought of getting a divorce. At this point, Stacy was afraid of Drew Peterson. She described him as controlling and abusive. In October 2007, Stacy was going to do some painting with her sister, but she didn't show up. Later on, Stacy's sister filed a missing persons report, and Drew initially cooperated with the police. Then he said Stacy had left him for another man. She had taken money, her passport, and her bikini. Stacy's loved ones didn't believe Stacy would actually abandon her children. Neither do I. The police searched the house and took some items to process it, but it's also speculated some items were missing from the house, and those items included a nightstand, scuba diving weights, and a blue barrel that could hold a body. What's interesting is a neighbor said he saw Drew with a man taking the barrel away, and that man was Drew's stepbrother. The stepbrother said he had helped Drew dispose of the barrel and Drew paid him. He then realized he had helped Drew dispose of the body of Stacy, and this affected him badly, and he tried to end his life, but he survived. And my question is, couldn't he take the police to that location, or was his statement dismissed? Drew denied all of it and said his brother had a history of mental illness and alcohol abuse. In November 2007, the investigators believed Stacy was a victim of homicide and Drew Peterson became a suspect. Stacy's disappearance generated a lot of interest in Kathleen's death. And on November 2007, Kathleen's body was exhumed and examined by a pathologist who didn't know Drew Peterson. And then Kathleen's death was ruled as a homicide. And it was a homicide staged to look like an accident. Then the case of Kathleen Savio's death was reopened. While people were looking for Stacy and investigations on Kathleen's death was ongoing, Drew Peterson kept himself busy, especially with his love life. He didn't wait very long, and in December 2008, it was announced he was engaged to another young girl. But her father gave her an ultimatum regarding the way Drew controlled her, and he feared she might have the same fate as his previous wives, number 3 and number 4. And in January 2009, it was made public she had canceled off the engagement and had moved out of Drew's home. She said she had come into her senses, and she said the engagement was a publicity stunt because Drew liked to be in the media spotlight. On May 7th, 2009, Drew Peterson was indicted and arrested for the murder of his third wife, Kathleen Savio. Much of the case was dependent on hearsay, especially with Stacy's statements she made to the pastor. Initially, a judge said it wasn't reliable, so those statements couldn't be presented in court as evidence. But in April 2012, an Illinois appellate court reversed the judge's decision, saying the prosecution could use 8 statements made by Kathleen before she died and Stacy before she disappeared. Of course, the defense objected. They said hearsay comments violated Drew's 6th Amendment, which is the right to confront any witnesses testifying against him. But the thing is, in 2008, a new law was passed which is called Drew's Law, which permits courts to consider statements from unavailable witnesses as long as prosecutors are able to prove that the witness was killed to prevent testimony and hearsay statements are reliable. So basically, the statements of Kathleen and Stacy were admitted. But of course, there were some issues during trial. On August 2nd, 2012, news outlet reported the judge would rule a mistrial. And on August 15, Drew told the judge he wanted to withdraw the request for mistrial. He was convinced, in my opinion, he was going to be found not guilty. However, on September 6, 2012, Drew Peterson was found guilty of the premeditated murder of Kathleen Savio. He was sentenced to 38 years in prison, and 3 years after he was found guilty, Drew tried to put a hit on the prosecutor in his murder trial. But things didn't go his way. After an inmate tipped off the prosecutors on February 9, 2015, Drew Peterson was charged, and in May 2016 he was found guilty of solicitation of murder and solicitation of murder for hire, and he was then sentenced to an additional 40 years in prison. After 13 years after Stacy's disappearance, Stacy's sister Cassandra still hasn't given up on bringing her remains home. She has spent all of her time, money to bring Stacy back. In 2018, she claimed she knew where Stacy was, But unfortunately, according to her, the police haven't helped in retrieving the body. According to Cassandra Cales, Drew Peterson disposed of Stacy's body in the sanitary and shipping canal. She also claimed she had sonar images of the body on the bottom of the riverbed in 2007. Later in 2008, she also informed the police the body had dislocated, and she also used sonar images, but they didn't recover the body. It's an ongoing battle to find Stacy, and Stacy deserves to go home. She deserves closure. The thing is, when you're searching on your own with sonar teams, regardless if you find the person or not, you can't bring the body back up by yourself. The police has to be involved. So I wonder if mass media exposure would put pressure into authorities to look for Stacy's body using Cassandra's information. So, this is the case of Drew Peterson. He was controlling, abusive, and he is a murderer. And he used his position as a police officer to get away with his crimes because he knew how investigation worked. Kathleen's murder was hands down financially motivated, and Stacy knew too much. I'm going to point out something, and I want to hear your opinion. Drew crossed the line with Kathleen when he killed her to solve a problem he had. Then Stacy became a problem and he killed her, allegedly. It's my honest opinion the next girl he married, when she would eventually become a problem, he would have killed her too. I honestly think that Drew Peterson was a wife serial killer in the making. And this is all alleged, but I really do believe it. His second murder, he disposed of the body. No body, no crime. He was perfecting himself. What do you think? I'm glad Kathleen's family and Kathleen got vindication, but I'm really sorry for Stacy's sister, who keeps hope of bringing Stacy home. And I truly hope she finds Stacy. And to end this, don't forget to subscribe, click the notification bell button. Thank you for watching. See you the next time. Stay safe.